You are listening to the new man beyond the macho jerk and the new age wimp. Your host is men's coach Tripp Lanier.
Does being professionally successful mean you have to sell your soul? What happens when we do things just to make a buck? And how did a subpoena from the FBI help today's guest reveal his deeper values? Duct Tape Marketing founder Jantsch has written some best-selling business books, and now he's pulling back the curtain to discuss how our deeper values play a role in our success. His book, The Self-Reliant Entrepreneur, is a gift to those of us who want to create alignment between what we believe and how we create value in the world. If you're tired of the typical hyper-achievement BS that passes for business advice, then today's conversation will be a breath of fresh air. Welcome to The New Man. Today we're talking with Jantsch. He's the author of several best-selling books, including Duct Tape Marketing. He's got a new book called The Self-Reliant Entrepreneur, 366 daily meditations to feed your soul and grow your business. You can learn more by visiting ducttapemarketing.com. John, good to see you again.
Hey, yeah, great to see you again, Tripp.
Yeah, for those listening, he interviewed me yesterday for his podcast, Duct Tape Marketing. So we're big, deep friends now. We go back a long way.
Yeah, we even got to chat about a little mountain town in Colorado that we both have in common.
That's right. Yeah, we got to come back to my Colorado time there. So I've loved going through this new book, The Self-Reliant Entrepreneur. I've got a lot of reasons why I'm enjoying it. But first, if I'm imagining I'm somebody listening to this and they're kind of like, all right, clock's ticking. Why should I care? Why should I care about being self-reliant? I'm an entrepreneur. I want to know what's going to give me an edge in my business. So let's meet him where he is. What does it mean to be self-reliant? What are you talking about there?
Well, first I'll give you the what's in it for me is I firmly believe that entrepreneurs build a better business when they build a better when they build it better themselves. And that's, I think entrepreneurship is probably the greatest personal development program ever created, if we choose to see it as such. So this book, I wrote really is in a lot of ways an answer to kind of my own journey, or at least a reflection on my own journey. I've owned my own business for about 30 years and really taken a lot of time and energy and thought and perspiration into trying to be more self-aware, trying to develop myself, as a way to not only get better, but as a way to grow my business and let's face it, in some cases survive, some of what it takes to be an entrepreneur. So the self-reliant part, I wish I could be more compact in my answer here, but there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, please do.
The self-reliant part of the title borrows from Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay that many entrepreneurs are familiar with, or at least they've seen on Pinterest boards quoted, called Self-Reliance. And I think that, a lot of times I first have to tell people what I don't mean by that. I mean, if you Google the term self-reliance or self-reliant, you're going to see some websites that talk about, killing your own food and building your own house and, not depending on anyone. And any entrepreneur who's achieved any level of success, realizes they cannot do this on their own. So it's definitely not about that. I think it's more about trusting yourself and what you are trying to accomplish, or at least what you think you're trying to accomplish today, so thoroughly that you're not swayed by other people's success or Facebook posts or even doubts. We've all probably had somebody in our life at some point say, "Why are you doing that? Can't you get a job? I thought you were going to be a doctor." All those kind of things that go on, and I think that we're swayed by them unless we develop a level of trust in our own ideas and or at least our own journey, so that we stay true to it.
It's such a big deal. I know that, so many of the kind of quote business books that I come across, they're very tactical. They also seem to be rather heartless. They don't really get into some of this. If it's mindset oriented, it's more like the grit type thing. And you just got to kind of cut yourself off from your doubts and your fears and just keep going. But there's what you're pointing to here with so much of this is like, no, we want to embrace that. And we also just don't want to let the doubts and the fears and the stuff get in our own way. We want to be bigger than that. We want to feed that part that's bigger, feed that stronger wolf, so to speak. As you talk about the path of personal growth, I moved out to Boulder years ago, sold my business, and became a personal growth junkie. I mean, I was doing all these wacky retreats, and it was all very personally oriented. And I thought I identified myself as this like guinea pig, as somebody who's really willing to put myself through the ringer personally and spiritually to do these things. And then when it became time to really put my both feet in and build my business, I found that was the path that really cooked me, that really transformed me, that really challenged me much more than any kind of retreat or, thing that I subjected myself to on a personal level. And I see that, when I see other entrepreneurs going along this path, I wonder how often they realize that they're on a transformational path, that they are on this that they're going to change who they are on a fundamental level if they're really on this path.
I would like to say that a lot do, but I think the reality is most of us, it's hindsight. A lot of what I wrote in this book about my journey and learning and my path and my whatever nuggets of wisdom I might offer. A lot of them come in hindsight. You make mistakes, you have something happen, and how you respond to that, how you recover from that is really where the learning is a lot of times. And I think sometimes, I over the course of my career, I've definitely had big aha moments, where I can point to and say, this was a major milestone. This was a change. This was I structure the book around seasons. I think a lot of entrepreneurs have multiple seasons that sort of cycle around. And, but I also think a lot of times it's sort of this residual growth that just builds up over time, and you start witnessing your thoughts. You start saying, oh, I remember how that went last time. I can handle that in a much more evolved way now. And I think that's where, I hate to say it. I don't think you read a book and find that. I think it's a practice.
Yeah, I think that is. And I think there is an element of self-awareness there. It also comes back to challenging this idea about how things are supposed to go, right? So sure. How many books are out there like, here's the 3 steps for this or the 5 steps for this? And it's supposed to be this linear process. Whereas when we tap into it, it's very cyclical and it's non-linear. And a lot of times we have to go down a rabbit hole and, oh man, that was a mistake. But then we realize years later, that was not a mistake. That was such a gift that I went down that road. And the wisdom traditions point us to this. They help us see how we can glean, pull the gold out of this stuff. But oftentimes, I don't know if it's just in this kind of very masculine way of going through business and expecting things to be very linear. And I must be doing it wrong if I'm in this position and those guys are doing it right. I love that you're introducing these concepts here and just saying, wait a second, there's seasons, there's cycles, it's not always going to be ABC 1, 2, 3.
Well, I tell you, the number one practice, if I'm going to give anybody any advice, is to realize that there's so few things we can actually control. And I think that that's where people get very, very stuck. It's like, here's the path I'm going down. Here's the plan. Here's our Q3 objectives, and it's like, and I know how we're going to get there. Well, no, you don't, and I think that if we can start to let go and think, the only 2 things I think we can control at all is how we show up and how we respond to what happens. And I think that a lot of entrepreneurs get really wound up and stressed out about, no, it's supposed to go this way. And again, experience, longevity, a lot of times will teach you. I'm sure you've had this happen. I know I've had it happen. Something that you wanted to make happen didn't happen. You're really disappointed. And what it did is it opened a door for something much more magical to happen. Yeah. And I think that happens enough times and you start to go, oh, well, maybe that thing wasn't supposed to do that. Maybe this is the path. I'm still going to get to where I'm trying to go. It's just a different way.
It seems like it's easy to have this really polarized view of, okay, I'm going to predict the future. I'm going to know how step 5 is going to work out. And that can be rather soul crushing when the reality of life comes along. But it kind of throws us into it can throw us into another place, which is, well, then I should just give up. I should just go with the flow. And where in actuality, there's more of a balance here, which is I have my intention, I have my sail, I have my rudder, but there's going to be storms along the way. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like how can we have an intention to go somewhere knowing that the unknown is coming?
Well, I one of the core topics of the book, and it's actually broken into 12 months. I don't think we've talked about that. It's actually a daily, calendar book. And one of each book or each month has a theme, and one of the core themes is resilience. And I think that that's probably the most successful entrepreneurs, the most positive people that you encounter in your life, probably have a little more of the resilience gene than some other folks, because they're able to, instead of saying, "Oh, this didn't work," or "I'm no good," or "I failed," or "this is a bad idea," they are, I think, able to reframe it as something, not global, but something very specific. No, this idea or this iteration or this target market, wasn't, what I thought, it was going to be. So what did I learn from that? And I think that, 2020, certainly awakened many, many people, I think, to the need for resilience, in ways that maybe had gone dormant. But I do think that that's the trait, if you will, that we need to really focus on developing.
You and I talked yesterday on your podcast about this notion of proving, and I find that the thing that gets in the way of this resilience piece is if X happens, then it was personal. It was because I'm a failure. I'm a screw up. I've always been a screw up. There's these deep-seated, deep fears and stories that we carry around with us. And so what I'm starting to tease out here is this idea is that let's expect things to happen, that if we follow the steps, even if we follow the steps perfectly, stuff is still going to come along that we couldn't have planned for, and we might fail. It might not go the way that we want it to, but it doesn't mean that it has to be personal or that it's a reflection of us, being inadequate or not enough or getting into that comparison game here. And so is that the key to this resilience that you're talking about? Is like, as long as I make it personal, then I'm always going to kind of be stuck in this trap and working against myself. But if I can start to see it another way, maybe I can, okay, that happened. What can I learn from it? Let's go from there.
Yeah, there's no question that is the real trick to it. It's just a thing. It's not, it's not me. But I will tell you another thing that, and I don't know if this is just me but over the years, you want everything to go easy. You want it to just be smooth. But there's sometimes not a whole lot of excitement in that. To me, when challenge shows up is actually when I get far more engaged. And I think I think a lot of entrepreneurs are that way. In fact, sometimes if it's too easy, we do mediocre work and we get bored with it. So I'm not saying that I go out looking for ways to stress myself out, but I get more excited when there's a problem to solve.
Yeah, I like that. It comes back to I'm actually understanding that we are happiest or we're most energized and most alive when there's a bit of challenge there. There's part of our brain that always wants to be comfortable and never wants to be bothered, and we just kind of shrink into that life that gets smaller and smaller. But if we're ultimately wanting to experience aliveness, it's like, well, I need a little bit of a challenge. If I'm a dragon slayer, I need a dragon around here from time to time. It doesn't mean we go seek out places where we put ourselves in too much danger. There's a balance there, but it is like, oh, cool, I've got a good challenge here, and I want to sink my teeth into this.
And I would suggest that, I've talked to lots and lots of entrepreneurs, and at some point, you're going to feel like you're stuck. You feel like you're in a rut. And I think a lot of times, the way out of that is to say, okay, what can I do to push myself a little bit? And that, when I first got started speaking, for example, I'd written about things and I'd done things that I knew quite well. But I started proposing, as I got more confident, I started proposing speaking topics that I wanted to talk about, but quite frankly, I was going to have to figure out. I was going to have to learn. And so just little goofy things like that, I think, are really a requirement if you want to continue to grow.
I'm hearing you talk about like, well, here's the thing that I do in order to be successful. And then here's the thing over here that I'm actually curious about, that I feel drawn towards. Yeah. And sometimes that can feel like a threat. Wait a second. Let's stay with what we know. Let's stay in our lane. Let's not rock the boat a bit. When it came to my first business, back in when was that? That was the late 90s and early 2000s. I felt really fragmented. I felt like there was this version of me that I had to show up and be, and in order to just have my business and who my clients expected me to be. But secretly I was reading these personal growth books and philosophy books and spirituality and going on meditation retreats. And I felt like there were these two worlds. I felt really fragmented here. Here you come with this book, and there's this blend of, hey, we're going to talk about these deeper topics, and then we're going to also find a way to relate them to business. I'm curious what your path, did you ever feel fragmented, like there were these two worlds, or have you always been willing to entertain both and see how they benefited both?
No, again, I have to think back. So in hindsight, I would say that I initially felt that my journey started towards this path actually started after an FBI grand jury subpoena.
What was that? What happened there?
Oh no, that's not a story. We can tell that another day. No, actually, like a lot of people, I started my business, no plan, it's like I could hustle work and, I could get clients. And so after a few years in it, I had a nice business going, and one of my clients, I'll make the story short. One of my clients was actually being committed a federal felony in their business. I had nothing to do with it, but they just looked at their books and said, well, let's talk to everybody that's doing business with them.
Yeah.
So fortunately I didn't. But I always tell people, but did I know they were doing something a little funny? In my heart, yes, I did. And the reality was, for me, that was a moment to say, wait a minute, how did I get here? This isn't me. I'm from this day forward, I remember thinking, I'm never going to work with a client that I don't respect, that we don't share values. And what is that going to have to mean? First off, it's going to mean I have to get really solid about mine. And so that was the moment that really changed my business, but it also, I think, started me on a personal journey towards much more awareness, much more, what are practices I need to start developing, or habits I need to start developing, so that I can not only bring more joy to my work, but really, certainly not find myself in a position that's going to threaten my family. So that, that was 20 plus years ago now, 25 years ago almost now. And so that was really the start of my personal journey, down, some of the literature that I cite throughout this book, the practice of a daily morning, ritual and routine, was something I'm not sure if I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, that introduced me to the idea of morning pages and journaling. So I have a very kind of long and drawn out morning ritual, especially after the kids grew up. It got a lot easier to take that time. A really long answer to your question. I'll wrap it up with the idea that I kind of wrote this book for myself because it fit into my practice, and I think that it's a really wonderful thing that a lot of these, talking about spirituality and in the context of a professional podcast business, I think is an amazingly wonderful thing that was probably a little off limits, or kind of kept in some small corners of the internet, when it first kind of cropped up. But it's a beautiful thing that I think people realize that entrepreneurship and life is about a balance of mind, body, and spirit.
I love that you're bringing that. And I find that fragmentation is painful, right? When we know that over on this side of the page that I might be reading these books, or I might be having these conversations, or even just thinking about these certain things, but then we make a deal with ourselves and say, well, wait a second, I just got to go make a buck. And then we feel out of integrity, even if we're not doing anything legally wrong. There's just an aspect of like, I think this guy's, my client's business is BS, and I don't stand up for that, but I got to do it just to make a buck. And there's this, we can believe that fear that says, if I don't do this, then I'll die, right? That's the survival instinct in us. It's like, we have to do this just to survive. But the more that we strengthen this resolve, the more that we strengthen these values, it's so much harder to do the things that are out of alignment with our values, to be out of integrity. And I think that that's a good thing to come back to. And I think it does make our work better over time. If we're playing a long game, then it's going to come down to those relationships and that trust. And I'd personally rather work with somebody who has that instilled in them, instead of knowing they'll do just whatever it takes to make a buck.
Well, and I think a lot of people have realized too that wearing your beliefs on your sleeve is actually polarizing,
Right.
in some cases, and we need that. Because like you said, it's much easier to attract somebody who shares those values if you've made those values known, and by the same token, if that turns somebody off, that's probably not somebody that would have been a great relationship for you to engage in.
Yeah. When I work with some of my clients, they've been in that place where they've been hiding out or waiting,
Yeah.
and they've been in that safe place where they don't really stand out in the world, but now they've got something to say. They've got something they want to bring. And they're scared. They're scared to do that polarization piece. And they often think polarizing means go out and make people hate you. Like there's an active element of just going out and being like, I have to say something to get under people's skin. It's like, no, just go speak to the ones that you really want to help.
That's right.
And they'll say, oh, here's my guy. He's saying what I want to say. And the other people will just be like, oh, this guy's not my guy. I don't particularly, we're not aligned. I'll keep looking elsewhere. But there's this big fear. We're more scared of who am I going to piss off or who am I going to push away instead of who's going to come knocking on the door and saying, I'm so grateful you're doing this work.
Yeah. So one of the I've again read probably maybe as many self-development books as you, but one of Zig Ziglar's kind of things was that I think it actually came out in some sales training more plainly later that I read, but that you want fast no's in business. You don't want the worst thing in sales you can have is a maybe. That if something's not right, if you don't have the right approach, if you're not if you're not aligned, you want to know that quickly rather than 6 months later when everybody's in pain.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Well, let's talk about some of the voices that are in this
Sure,
book. You primarily focus on the transcendentalists. Who are these people? What did they kind of give us a sense of who these folks were?
So the first thing I have to clear up is have nothing to do with transcendental meditation. That's a common misperception, but it was a label really applied to some writers and thinkers and at the time, countercultural revolutionaries in the mid 19th century. And it was a time period, if you think about what was going on in America, at least at the time, we were on the cusp of a civil war. Women were just starting to speak up about the right to vote and marching in the streets, and we were trying to abolish the legal act of human slavery. So it was really the first countercultural period in America, and it showed up certainly in the literature at the time. You had some very overt voices like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau who were saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't listen to our parents, and maybe we don't need to listen to those preachers and the people that came before us. Maybe we need to start thinking for ourselves. And I think there's a really good reason that literature has stood the test of time. And you even think about the works of fiction. At that time, it was the first time you had characters, Little Women, Scarlet Letter, Moby Dick, all books that we were asked to read and still are asked to read in many cases in high school and college. It's the first time you had a protagonist that was saying, hey, this may cost me everything, but I have to be true to me. And I think that still today, 150 years later, that is some of the best entrepreneurial advice going. And I think there's really a reason people are still asked to read Walden in high school.
Yeah. How is this different from the Stoic movement? There's been this resurgence. Sure. There's a lot of people are really excited about Stoics as of late. And so how can you compare and contrast those two?
I think the biggest thing, well, obviously time frame. The Stoics were 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years, almost 2,000 years earlier than the Transcendentalists. There's no question the Transcendentalists were informed by Stoicism, certainly by Eastern spiritual traditions. I mean, that shows up in theirs. To me, I see the biggest difference is that Stoicism, I think, is more about individualism, whereas I think Transcendentalism was more about connectedness. There's no question that Ralph Waldo Emerson very much drew from the probably from the Buddhist writings about this idea that all living things and all, in fact, Thoreau took it even farther to say all living things, including plants and and trees and whatnot, are connected in this kind of big giant soup. And I think that's leads to a lot of the self-reliance idea being about, not only trusting yourself, but also having, because of that, having a great deal of empathy for others. So I think that Ryan Holiday is a good friend of mine. We both have the same literary agent, and he wrote a book called The Daily Stoic. And I kind of laughingly say, I hope I don't turn your audience off here, but it's a little more bro-ish, frankly, than the self-reliant entrepreneur. I think the self-reliant entrepreneur is a little more, how can we do this all together?
I really appreciate that. I always thought show me a stoic when he's having an argument with his wife. I want to see that because suddenly his ideals, I imagine some of them are going to kind of go out the window when he's got to get into a really a relationship aspects. Like, if you live alone up on the hill somewhere, stoicism's awesome, but coming down here and be in relationships, and stoicism starts to show its cracks a bit. So not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, a lot of great stuff in there, but I do appreciate what you're bringing from the transcendentalists. I also echo, I'm a big fan of Taoism and this understanding the relationships between nature and how they just show up naturally in our own life. And somehow, why would there suddenly be this, line between what happens naturally all around us in the physical world and then our own world and our own businesses? And so having a wisdom, being able to look at these cycles and these seasons and to recognize, okay, where is this happening? Where are these patterns going to show up in my own life? It seems like the transcendentalists were able to kind of incorporate that as well.
Oh, and I think I'm going to really go off the deep end here, but I think we as a species, humans as a species, have just over-evolved, frankly. Because of,
in some ways,
but we've lost touch with that. I love some of the First Peoples, traditions of how important the land and how important nature and how important every player had a role to play, and that we're all in this big relationship dependent upon each other, and we've lost a lot of that, I think.
I think so. And I think, when I've talked to so many quote successful guys, and they say, so many of my victories are hollow. Yeah. And I think a lot of it's because they've lost touch or they've lost connection with what is substantial in their lives. So they've gone out and done these things, but it's when things feel hollow, we've disconnected ourselves from the things that fill us up naturally. And so, if you want to have victories that actually mean something, I think we have to reconnect with the natural world, with our relationships, with all the things that if you were to take them away in a moment's notice, all the wins wouldn't mean anything at all.
Yeah, well, you and I were talking about, because you can kind of see out my windows some lodgepole pines and snow, and I could be totally wrong in this, but I challenge anybody to go out back, a place like this and sit under a tree and not feel a little better. I really do.
Yeah.
I mean, there is something, physical about it. It's not, you can write about it and talk about it and, consider it some sort of spiritual practice, but I think there is a natural physical element to it. There's no question in my mind.
I'm glad you're beating the drum for this. So many that I know are in this thing, I'll get to that one day. One day I'll appreciate the natural world. One day I'll spend more time in my relationships. One day I'll take better care of my body. But for right now, I've got to make things happen. And we get into this false sense of everything is about survival when in actuality we're doing just fine. And so I love that you're saying, hey, wait a second, let's not lose the bigger picture here. Let's reconnect with these things, and it'll make us stronger. It'll make us stronger in the challenges that we face.
Well, I think the real key is a lot of that comes from lack. Like, if I don't do this, what? I'll miss out this opportunity. This won't happen. I won't I won't accomplish this. And I think that a lot of this writing is about no, wait a minute. There's so much abundance. that doing things and acting from a place of lack is robbing you of your joy. And if you realize that there's so much, that, and you are enough, right now, then I think that you can sit back and enjoy the ride a little more.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing there is, what if there really isn't a monster under the bed? There might be some things I need to handle, but what if it doesn't mean that everything's about to fall down or burn down? What if I didn't have anything to prove? Suddenly we can tap into that bigger part of ourselves and bring more strength instead of believing that we're in this place of lack, as you say. And I think when we're in that place of lack, that we justify doing things that go against our values, go against our body, go against our relationships. We betray ourselves in those places. So we're kind of back here full circle.
No question. So I wonder if we've kind of talked around the book. I wonder if you wouldn't mind if I read today's.
Yeah.
It takes about 90 seconds.
Please do.
And I think that more than anything else, that will sort of help people go, oh, that's what the book's about. So
Let's do it.
It's really 3 parts. We've talked about this transcendentalist literature. So every day I source some reading from over, I don't know, I need to count one of these days, but probably 100 or so authors. And that actually was very, very fun for me to just do the research for the book. I really got in some texts I knew, of course, but I discovered a lot of people I'd never heard of, a lot of women authors, that really were not household names because, again, they were, they had to write in darkness, at the time.
Wow.
And then I kind of riff on, that day's reading, and then I leave you with a question every day. And so it really does fit into, this format does fit into, and a lot of people have shared with me that they do pick it up every morning and just kind of gives them something to think about that day. So we're going to, Edgar Allan Poe was actually not considered a transcendentalist. He actually made fun of the transcendentalists, at the time, but he was a writer from that period, and I love Edgar Allan Poe's work. So I did put him in here too. So we are recording this January 12th. The title is Your Own Crazy. Had the routine of our life at this place been known to the world, we should have been regarded as madmen, although perhaps as madmen of a harmless nature. So that's from his Murders of the Rue Morgue, 1841. Entrepreneurs possess their own special brand of crazy, and that's just fine. Truly self-reliant entrepreneurs bear more resemblance to artists than the traditional business person. To make something out of nothing requires equal parts hallucination and determination. It's no coincidence, then, that terms like lean and canvas abound in the startup literature. Artists, like entrepreneurs, struggle for many reasons, but often it's because they determine to stay true to their vision when it would be so much easier to just get a job and collect pay. Today, wear your badge of madness proudly, although do no harm. Your question for today: what's one time when you did not stay true to your vision or word for fear of looking foolish?
Gosh, I'll answer it right now. Yeah, I did it for years. I did it for years in my first business. So, this is the way that I got to do my business. I can't have these types of clients. I can't do this kind of work. If I go down this road, I'll go broke. People think I'm crazy. People think I'm weird or whatever. Yeah, it's definitely happened. I think it comes up, every 6 months, there's some version of bumping up against that fear. If I were to really lean into who I'm about and what I'm about, everything will fall apart. There's that lack.
Now, I know that you've written a lot about that idea of we make a lot of decisions about, how it will look, or who, how people will think about us, as opposed to, the impact we're trying to make.
Yeah. I also love that you touched on the artistry aspect of this. I went to art school. I have an art background, and I come across a lot of folks that have more of a competitor approach to this work. And it always baffles me. It's like, how is this competition when we're really helping you bring what is unique to you and your unique vision to the world? There is no other. If we're doing this right, we're really focusing on the thing that makes it unique instead of like the other one. I'm not want to help you make a Wendy's to their McDonald's. Let's have you do your thing really well out here in the world. But I understand and appreciate that folks get off on the competitive thing, but it's always been about creativity and art for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Amen.
Wonderful. John Jantsch, you can find the Self-Reliant Entrepreneur. Where's the best way to get it?
Pretty much anybody that sells books. I always like to make plugs for that local bookstore. If you're going to order it anyway, do it there. Shout out to Rainy Day Books in Kansas City area, my favorite little independent bookstore. But there are certainly the digital version, as well as you can, if you want to listen to me in your head every day reading, you can get the audible version as well.
Wonderful. All right. And your website is ducttapemarketing.com. Is that right?
That's right. DUCTTAPE marketing.com.
Thank you so much, John. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, me too, Tripp. Thanks.
If these interviews are helping you, please leave a positive review on whatever podcast app you use so that others can discover the show more easily.